Hello and welcome back everyone to another Pokemon TCG tutorial. We got a lot of good feedback from you guys from the last video, so Bean and I got together again to bring you a tutorial now on how to build your first deck. If you're new to Pokemon and you haven't seen the first video that I did on how to play the Pokemon TCG, I recommend going back and watching that one first. Now, while there is a lot of information, this is going to be a rather general guide. If you want me to go into more detail about specific types of decks in future videos, let me know in the comments. Now, are you ready to get into this? Let's do it. When deciding which deck you want to play, figure out what you like. It doesn't have to be top tier right now, just anything that strikes your fancy and is legal in the format you want to play in. The standard format includes cards from the most recent sets, starting with the cards with the D block marker. In this kind of deck, you'll want to figure out your main attacker or set, such as Rapid Strike, Fusion Strike, or Single Strike. Those sets have a lot of inherent synergy built in, which makes it easier to get them going. The expanded format includes cards from the Black and White expansion and onward. Similar to standard, you want to figure out your main attacker and work around that. Finally, there is the Gym Leader Challenge format, or GLC, which also includes cards from Black and White onward, with some added rules we also went over in the last video. All you really need to do here is pick a type of Pokemon and start finding cards that work well with it. For more information on the specific format, you can go to gymleaderchallenge.com. Once you've selected the cards you want to work around, it's important to understand their strengths and weaknesses. This way you can decide how to make their strengths shine and how to cover their shortcomings. If you're thinking about playing competitively, understanding the current meta will play a huge role as well. For example, Palkia V-Star is an absolute powerhouse in the standard format right now, so you should probably avoid decks built around fire Pokemon like Entei V, who are weak to water and are going to struggle no matter what. On the flip side, focusing on decks that have at least one electric type attacker, such as Flying Pikachu VMAX, would be ideal. Regardless of which type of deck you go with, the next step will be to know what kind of support is available to your desired type or archetype. For example, Entei V is weak to water, but has very strong single prizers available to back them up like Radiant Charizard or Radiant Heatran. Fire types also have the Stadium Magma Basin, which can help get more energies in play while also keeping your opponent's stadiums off the field. Now, I mentioned single prizers there as support attackers, but what if you wanted to make a deck of exclusively single prize Pokemon, or double prizers or triple prizers? Well, there's some pros and cons to each that you should consider first. Single prize decks have lower health pools to work with and therefore typically focus on being efficient and resilient. This means being able to set up your strategies before too many get knocked out, and having recursion cards like Ordinary Rod and Rescue Carrier to bring them back from the discard pile once they get smacked around. Now, there are very few single prize Pokemon that can one-shot V, VMAX, or V-Star Pokemon, with some exceptions. That being said, any decent single prize deck will be able to consistently two-shot them. This makes them very safe to trade with on your end. Losing a couple early on isn't going to hurt nearly as bad as losing a V Pokemon in terms of prizes. Once you're set up, you'll be able to quickly close the gap by taking multiple prize cards each turn, while your opponent can only get one. Still, not every single prize deck takes that long to set up. In fact, decks like Lunarock or Regigate rely on getting set up early and quickly by flooding your side of the board with Pokemon and energy for their respective strategies. Of course, that makes cards like Avery and Collapse Stadium strong counters for these kinds of decks. Another natural enemy of single prize decks are decks that specialize in spread damage, that is, damage that can hit your bench as well as your active Pokemon. While not as popular as they used to be, Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX and Jolteon VMAX are able to take multiple KOs in a single turn. This makes setting up your strategies nearly impossible to execute, though there are cards like Manaphy that can still help with these situations if you've got the bench space for it. Moving on to double prize decks, which have become the most popular in competitive play. This again refers to V and V-Star Pokemon. Double prize decks are good because they combine the resiliency of single prize decks while still being able to do large amounts of damage like triple prize decks. Their true strength, however, is their speed, which both single prize and triple prize decks have a hard time keeping up with. For instance, in a basic V deck, the player doesn't even have to worry about evolving their Pokemon to reach their full potential. V-Stars, on the other hand, still need to evolve, but they have the added benefit of their V-Star powers, which are abilities or attacks that, in most cases, can change the tide of a game. Palkia and Arceus V-Star, for instance, both have abilities that can guarantee early attacks or effectively set up for the late game. These two are also very easy to build up since they have manageable energy costs for their attacks. Palkia, for example, only needs 2 energy to attack. Applying one from your hand and another from the discard pile via the supporter Melanie will have you ready to attack in a single turn. V and V-Star Pokemon will almost always have the ability to two-shot V-Star or V-Max Pokemon and guarantee a knockout on virtually any single prizer. For this reason, the strength of double prize decks are an issue for triple prize decks. While powerful, triple prize cards are just more of a liability now, since knocking just 2 of them out will end a game. Their strengths revolve around low energy costs, while being able to either two-shot or one-shot other V-Star or V-Max Pokemon, or spread damage to their opponent's bench Pokemon as well. The previously mentioned Urshifu and Jolteon VMAXs are prime examples of this, as well as Dragapult VMAX, which can even get around Manaphy's Wave Veil ability. Even so, they aren't much stronger than V-Star Pokemon in spite of their 3 prize cost. In fact, the only VMAXs that are getting much of any play are Mew, with Ice Rider Calyrex and Rapid Strike Urshifu on the fringes. In order for these cards to pull their weight against the V-Star meta, they need to be hyper consistent or have an attack or ability that can upset the meta. Mew VMAX, for instance, is supported by the Fusion Strike set, specifically Genesect V's Fusion Strike system. This ability allows the player to draw until they have as many cards in their hand as Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. It honestly feels like these players are drawing their entire decks into their hands in a single turn, due to them typically playing 3 Genesects at a time, with the ability only being limited to how many Genesects are in play. My personal grievances with this set aside, its effectiveness does allow it to consistently get turn 1 or 2 attacks. Rapid Strike Urshifu has access to the support from the Rapid Strike set, but can also one-shot the very prominent Arceus V-Star due to its weakness. And Flying Pikachu VMAX, while having no set support, can be accelerated easily enough with Arceus V-Star or other cards while hitting Palkia V-Star for weakness. So while triple prize cards are fun and typically cheaper to play and build around, they are becoming more and more risky to play in the V-Star meta. You obviously don't have to stick with all single, double, or triple prizers in your deck, but hopefully now you have a better understanding of the benefits and risks around each type. Once you've figured out what your main attacker and strategy is, it's time to identify the defining traits of the deck. These traits can be split up into your main and backup attacker, synergy pieces, draw power, and consistency pieces. Let's start with the strengths and weaknesses of your main attacker by looking at Entei V. Entei's attack only costs 2 energy, but relies on how many Pokemon are benched on either side of the field to do full damage. If your opponent is aware of this and benches less Pokemon, Entei's attack suffers. It can also be walled out by a Pokemon like Miltank, which nullifies all damage done by a V Pokemon, and has been very popular for that reason. The presence of these 2 weaknesses need to be addressed when building the deck around Entei, namely with a backup attacker. In this situation, we'll be using Radiant Heatran, whose damage doesn't rely on bench Pokemon and can't be stopped by Miltank. As the meta evolves, so too will this decision. If Miltank, for example, falls out of favor for whatever reason, we can then revisit our backup attacker to a more energy-efficient Pokemon. If we go into a game where those obstacles are not present, however, Entei has some good support to strengthen it. As mentioned before, Magma Basin allows you to accelerate fire energy from your discard pile to your benched fire Pokemon at the cost of 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. It's not always a good idea to deal damage to yourself, but in Radiant Heatran's case, those counters are required for it to attack. Now, since Entei's attack only requires 2 energies, you can get set up to attack with it in a single turn. But how do we get the energies into the discard pile? That's where cards like Kindler or Liepard come in. Kindler will allow you to search out cards from the top of your deck in exchange for a fire energy, and Liepard requires you to discard a card from your hand to draw 2 extra cards. Typically, discarding is a fair cost for this kind of draw power, but in this situation, it actually helps move our strategy along. Aside from specific synergy, most decks rely on a few staple supporter cards in order to fulfill their card draw needs. Marnie and Professor's Research, for example, are 2 cards that are prominent in most, if not all, meta decks because of their superior card advantage. Regardless of what kind of deck you build, having at least 2 of each of these cards is generally a safe bet. There are other Pokemon that can fill this role as well. Cinccino is a popular option because it can do what Liepard can, but both stages can be searched out with level balls. Crobat V and Bibarel are also popular due to them providing draw support without the discard cost. And some Pokemon can be your main attacker and your draw support, like Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX. This card accelerates energies and draws cards with a single ability. Other decks have draw power built into their core strategies, like Fusion Strike's Genesect V or Rapid Strike's Octillery. In instances where the Pokemon themselves are inherently drawing cards, you have some flexibility to sacrifice a few supporter draw cards and invest more in other synergy pieces. Finally, there are consistency pieces. This means the ability to search out key cards for your deck strategy as frequently as possible. For example, if you're using the single prize Inteleon line, you'll probably want to run level balls in your deck since they can search out both Sobble and Drizzile since they're both under 90 HP. Drizzile can then use its Shady Dealings ability to search out any trainer card from your deck, which is a versatile way to progress your game plan to say the least. If you're making a grass deck, you might want to run Turffield Stadium to search out your evolutionary lines. You'll also want to keep cards like Switch and Escape Rope in mind to quickly pivot between support and attack Pokemon, allowing more flexibility. Finally, Boss's Orders offers a unique role as the finisher in most decks, since it can bring a Pokemon of your choice from your opponent's bench to the active spot. As many decks cannot one-shot V-Star or V-Max Pokemon, having a supporter to bring out a damaged one that may have retreated can be crucial in securing knockouts in any matchup. It can also be used defensively to stall by bringing out a Pokemon that either isn't ready to attack or is hard to retreat. This information should all help you on your way to building your first deck. But there's one more thing you need to do before you can perfect it. Playtesting. It's highly unlikely you're going to have a good build on your first try. Happens to everyone. It will take a few games to figure out what problems you're running into consistently, since even professional players can have bad hands or get unlucky with what cards are prized. One bad game doesn't mean a bad deck, but a few bad games might mean you need to tweak your deck or your playstyle. Some things to keep in mind. If you're not having trouble with energy, leave them alone. If you're prizing essential cards too often, consider running one or two more copies in lieu of less important pieces. If you're never using certain cards, it might be safe to experiment with something that might be more useful. Just remember that if you're playing on the TCGO, you should make a copy of your deck before making adjustments so you can always start over if you need to. Once things start getting smoother, you're also going to have to familiarize yourself with your deck, learning it inside and out. I typically aim to master my first 3 moves. What cards do I need out early to make my strategy work? What can I safely sacrifice if I need to? And what are common misplays that I'm making that are hindering my strategy? It's fairly safe to test out your decks on the TCGO against AI players, at least to get your initial flow. After getting some consistency, it'll be time to pit your deck against other players to figure out how to recover from someone actively trying to mess you up while also messing them up. Everyone loses from time to time, and everyone has bad games. Don't let the lows get you too down, because it's just a part of the process of getting wins. Hopefully with this information and the breakdowns of decks I used in my videos here, you'll be able to get a better understanding of how to deck build and keep improving over time. But that's all for this video. Like I said before, if you've got any requests for specific types of decks, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching, God bless you all, and I'll see you in the next one.